Hello, everyone. I am going to share my screen for this presentation. Thank you for coming. Okay. So I am now sharing my screen. Today, I am presenting on interdependence and mutual aid. This is a disaster preparedness strategy for our collective survival as informed by disability justice. I am your presenter today. My name is Thais Taylor. I go by Ty, and this is for the UPRISE Collective. Okay, meet your presenter. Thais Ty Taylor, Masters of Science in Education. They, them is a disabled Black, African-American, queer femme who is non-binary trans. They are a radical educator, artist activist, poet, essayist, and storyteller, and are a proponent of the disability justice and abolitionist frameworks. Their work specifically and artfully details their experience in surviving disability and severe mental illness, intergenerational trauma and poverty, and other intersecting forms of oppression in the United States of America. What's important about introducing myself to you is that you can understand from my identity how my identity politics could be formed and why I feel like I am an expert to talk about interdependence and mutual aid, especially from a disability justice framework perspective. Okay, so here's an overview. We have introduction. We'll be talking about interdependence as a disability justice principle. I will present to you a strategy for collective survival, mutual aid defined, overcoming disaster with mutual aid, anecdotal evidence from my West Philly community, mutual aid is disability justice, conclusion, and resources. Okay. Introduction. Under late-stage capitalism, crisis and disaster are endemic. We see the impact of profit-driven culture and values everywhere, from the burgeoning floods occurring in the past few weeks to the resultant dismal air quality from wildfires in Canada this summer. Ongoing climate disaster is one of the most certain features of our near and distant future. The good news is that we can and we will survive collectively. I'm going to say that again. The good news is that we can and we will survive collectively. By investing in social justice communities with the ultimate goal of liberation from the oppressive systems which bind us, we are engaging in disaster preparedness. We can further these efforts by centering mutual aid in our communities. If we make collective survival a daily goal through our work in building mutual aid networks, we will have the best infrastructure whenever disaster strikes. If we commit to building solidarity by working together to meet individual and collective needs for care, then we will also in turn build a new reality to counter the individualistic and parasitic environment in which we now live. So I'm going to talk about interdependence, which is one of the disability justice principles. So here in this image are some of the principles of disability justice, like intersectionality, leadership of the most impacted, anti-capitalism. And so using this framework, right, we can look at the principle of interdependence more closely. So here's a quote from Sin's Invalid. Before the massive colonial project of Western European expansion, we understood the nature of interdependence within our communities. We see the liberation of all living systems and the land as integral to the liberation of our own communities, as we all share one planet. We attempt to meet each other's needs as we build towards liberation without always reaching for state solutions that inevitably then extend its control further over our lives. Right? So the insidious nature of colonialism and capitalism is that it makes it seem like it's all that we've ever known, and it's all that we will ever know. So in pulling that, wool over our eyes, it's basically trying to make us believe that it's natural, right? But as Black, Indigenous, people of color, we know that culturally we have other traditions, right? We have our own histories that have predated colonialism, and we can rely on these systems and values like our connection to the land and liberation through the land to really plan our future and see a life without these systems. We cannot reach for state solutions because we already know that the state doesn't care about us, right? As people of marginalized identities, if we're looking at, being disabled and being under, the oppressive system of ableism and other intersecting oppressions, we know that the state doesn't care about us. And in our communities, as marginalized people, we know that we care about each other and that we do best when we care for each other. So this is looking at interdependence as being key to having lives free from state control and free from colonialism and capitalism. Let me make sure. Okay. So our strategy, let me move this. Okay. So our goal is collective disaster survival. One of the strategies is to build and maintain interdependent community. So interdependent community develops from the geographic location of where disaster strikes, or just of a particular community, plus those who are moved to help. So we know that because of the internet, there are times where disaster strikes in a certain geographic location, but there are people who are committed to helping. Maybe they have family members from that geographic location. Maybe they're just moved by the stories of what's happened, and people, send help from afar and send resources, right? But these interdependent communities can be built before disaster strikes. The best case scenario is that we build them already so that when disaster strikes, we're pretty much ready. It's important to note that maintaining community requires education, cooperation, shared goals, and organizing. If we want these communities to be sustainable so that we can survive disaster on an ongoing basis, we have to do those things: the education, the cooperation, the organizing toward liberation. Because a community doesn't come together out of nothing. It can be complicated to exist in community. Liberation work is hard work, but again, this is really, as marginalized people, it's our birthright to exist in community, to grow in community, to thrive in community. And this is something we can absolutely do. One way to do that is to build and grow mutual aid efforts. The care and resource-oriented action community takes for its members to meet their needs is mutual aid. This is how we have always dealt with disaster and survival. And being disabled, my family history has been, the story of surviving sickle cell. My mom, my aunt, my grandpa, my niece, and as a Black family, and sickle cell is a disease that occurs in POC, mainly Black people. And so when you're disabled, right, your experience of disaster is compounded. And there's many instances where disabled people are left behind in disaster planning. So again, not just by the state, but because of ableism, even by other members of our community. So the experience of disaster as disabled is different than how other people experience it, but we have traditions of care culturally and in disabled communities. For example, in MAD communities, I mentioned that I have mental illness. We have specific ways of resisting state violence from institutions. And so these histories of our survival, right, they actually give us specific wisdom and resilience and resources to survive, even if we may be an afterthought. Again, this is our birthright. One second. So I'm arguing that the defining aspects of community make it the perfect site for surviving disaster of any magnitude. So because communities are centered around needs as they arise, and the best communities are also centered around anticipating future needs, right? This infrastructure of organizing, planning, cooperation, shared values. This is the perfect site to survive disaster because all of the things that you need to survive disaster are there in a community. There isn't really, I guess when we think about disaster, there's no part of disaster that community can't handle. We have this idea of American exceptionalism, and it's really to service the state, this lie that changing the world has to be something spectacular. Survival is achieved every day. We know this as marginalized people, right? Queer, trans, disabled, people of color, we know about survival. And we know about surviving in communities free from the state. So we already have many of the resources that we need. There's work that we can do to further these resources, to be even more prepared for disaster, for apocalypse, what we're considering the end of world. But it's truly through community that we can survive anything. And we know this from experience, right? This is about imagining and valuing our cultural inheritance and knowing that, again, colonialism, capitalism is not the end all be all. Communities have historically been a site of survival, facing, populations facing the unimaginable. Things have been truly possible through community. And I'll talk more about the life-saving nature of mutual aid. Okay, so looking at Spade's work, mutual aid is survival focused. It's community oriented and community led. It involves care and addresses the need to change things politically by way of creating social relationships that provide for people more than institutions do, right? So as we're talking about, these institutions are not invested in caring for us. They actually do the opposite. And the way to center care of people in our communities is to have the communities lead that care and to be a part of the ongoing process of care. By community, for community, we do this work. But it's really important to have the intention of addressing the need for change politically, right? Sorry. We know that these social relationships are about building a movement and changing the conditions that we live under, right? If we don't change these oppressive conditions, then we cannot change the world in our communities. So we have to knowingly engage in this work. And basically, the work that the community must do of survival is because of these institutions, right? So these institutions basically create conditions where the most marginalized have to work for their survival, and community meets those needs through mutual aid is one way, for example, through interdependence, building solidarity. And in doing that, we see that these communities can exist independent of institutions. So again, it's about that intention. Okay, this is a quote from Spade. Overcoming disaster with mutual aid. In the face of disaster, mutual aid helps people survive and builds new social relations centered in solidarity and resistance. And there goes that intentional part. These communities are meant to resist, right? It's not meant to further the status quo. And when it comes to mutual aid, there's definitely work to be done to ensure that mutual aid organizations and communities are not furthering the status quo and are instead supporting the survival of the most marginalized first. So this is a question. This is a critical thinking question. How can the government save you from the disasters it helps perpetuate? Right? So under capitalism, certain people are experiencing scarcity because of concentration of resources and wealth along racial lines, gender lines, class lines, to name a few. And so this scarcity is manufactured. And, things like environmental harm are manufactured. And so how can the government save you from what it does on purpose? Right? You can't be the cause and then save us from itself. It wouldn't be in the state's interest to save us from itself, right? The state is meant to perpetuate these systems and this harm, and to, as we talked about, maintain the status quo. So the helping hand of the state is limited, especially where survival and wellness are concerned. We save us always, we sustain us always. And, as it's been mentioned here, we know that this has been true historically, and it's important to recognize that and to substantiate that. And so, when we have this historical cultural knowledge, why would we go against that? In our communities, through our activities, we are building, as I mentioned, wisdom and resilience, right? That knowledge, looking at disabled communities and CRIP knowledge, is just as valuable as any other form of knowledge. Why would we not go with what we know works for us, right? Built by us, for us. So I have some anecdotal evidence of mutual aid in my West Philly community during the pandemic shutdown in 2020. So during the time of the pandemic shutdown, I was really surprised by the mutual aid organizing that showed up in my community. For example, people were hand making cloth masks, leaving them outside on their stoops for people to pick up. Another example was organizations that provided bottled water in Philly. And I mean community organizations, right, grassroots, that provided bottled water, because if you remember during that time, people were basically buying up all the water, right? So it was kind of a concern at the time. There was a lot going on then. And also providing toilet paper. That was an issue then. Organizations that, community organizations, right? People that I may not have known before, but saw organizing on social media were getting groceries to people, particularly disabled, chronically ill members of the community. And this was able to happen because there was a certain level of community organizing on Facebook, for example. There was like a West Philly queer group and neighborhood groups. And so that structure was utilized when disaster took place. And of course, with the pandemic, it's something that we really could not have anticipated. But again, having those networks in place prepares us for when disaster strikes. But it's important to note that, again, there's nothing extraordinary that you have to do. We already have the skills to implement, and it's very possible for each and every one of us to engage in mutual aid, to engage in this survival and care work. During this time, I was really impressed in West Philly in organization based in mutual aid, CBTEL, just emerged. And their care was so thorough and truly life-saving, especially as a disabled person. I had rides to doctor's visits as I needed, and the people who provided these rides, it was mutual aid, so there wasn't a hierarchy. There was an understanding that they're doing this work to support the community. They were masked, and this continued even into 2022, providing these services that really came out of disaster. Other than the rides, which weren't just the doctor's appointments, it was transportation, basically private transportation available. And there were other resources, grocery support, money for clothes. Basically, people were able to make open-ended mutual aid requests for services, for material resources like money, and basically it was whatever the need was. If they could meet it, they would. And I saw this effort really start from seemingly nothing. And I made friends with people who were organizing, and it really did become a community. I believe that they're still doing work in Philly today, and I'm just really thankful for that. I don't know how I would have gotten through the shutdown without the help and getting emergency medical care, whether I had to go to the emergency room or getting, if I couldn't be provided with a ride, being provided with funds for an Uber to visit my family in the suburbs of Pennsylvania. There was truly endless support. And again, as life-changing as it is, it's important that we normalize these efforts, because everyday people can and do make this happen, right? Especially under capitalism, there's so much surplus. We have more than enough food. There are empty homes, right? It's totally possible to give everyone what they need and more, but that will never happen under capitalism, right? So when we look at these communities, we can see that people provide each other with the resources that they have. From Band-Aids to medicine. I had people during the pandemic actually pick up my prescriptions for me. I also had people provide me with medication when they had a surplus. The care during that time was truly transformative, and it was like a different world. When we talk about the end of these oppressive systems, the amount of care that took place in 2020, just like, the political environment that was so specific to that time, really was, many people felt it was so palpable that we were on the brink of such a newness and transformation occurring in society. And so, since that time, 2020, there have been way more mutual aid organizations, community-based, nonprofit as well. Mutual aid is something that's talked about way more often, and something that we've seen so much more of as a whole society since the pandemic. But it also predates that. Okay, mutual aid is disability justice. So here's me. This is a flyer that was made for me. So one act of mutual aid was providing me with a service, somebody that I met through building mutual aid community had the skill of making flyers. It was a skill I did not have. And they were able to help me by making flyers that were nicer, more eye-catching, and aligned to further this mutual aid that I was having to build for survival. And so this is from February. It says mutual aid for Ty's necessities and medical bills. It mentions a goal amount of $1,200. Assist Ty in tackling several major medical bills and covering their expenses for this month. We've worked so hard to get Ty housed, and now that we have done so successfully, it is important to help them achieve greater stability as they work to take care of their health and necessities. Please make prompt donations and share this flyer widely. This is an immediate ask. And so part of this is really the beauty of being able to ask for mutual aid in your community, these open-ended asks, whether it be a certain amount of money, because we're not dealing with these institutions and we're doing this work on our own, there isn't the same criteria, right? I'm sober, and that's a part of community building for me. But when it comes to organizations, to receive resources that are survival-based, people have to, for example, be drug tested, right? The point of community-based mutual aid is, again, to challenge the status quo. And so this is about survival. This is about everyone being worthy of survival and care. And as mentioned in the flyer, right, these mutual aid efforts are not just about greater stability for me, or haven't been, but also about housing, which is a human right? That's a part of systemic injustice. And because I was able to work with my community while I was homeless for 8 months to raise mutual aid, literally daily, life-saving, to be able to stay in a hotel and off the streets, right? There was continual work that had to be done to continue to support me. But the most dangerous situation that I was in, literally fighting for survival to be off the streets, was supported by my community. And that's a community that I'm still engaged with today, right? And understanding the value of mutual aid, the community building that takes place, relationships over time as sites of resistance, particularly for a person with severe mental illness, to be taken care of in this way is definitely noteworthy. Again, when you're extremely marginalized and you have been devalued by society, labeled crazy, right? All of these things, it's isolating. Disability is isolating, right? Ableism is crushing. So this investment in mutual aid is an investment in disability justice and looking at the intersecting forms of oppression that we live under. And as I noted, this is life-saving. And the other important thing about providing this flyer is to provide a potential template for other people who need to make flyers for their own mutual aid, right? It includes a title, a goal amount. There's payment information that I edited out. There's some background about my experiences and my needs and request, basically, and a picture of me. So this kind of template can help anyone who wants to make a flyer or ask someone in their community to make a flyer for them to start sharing their needs. You basically cannot be helped Not only if you're not in community, but if you don't ask, right? I survived not because of the state. I survived because of my community. And I have been happy to support other people in their survival. Having been disabled and homeless last year, this year I was able to raise $550 in mutual aid for somebody else facing homelessness. And for me, that really speaks to the mutual part of mutual aid, right? I'm invested in this care work, and what's been done for me can be done for other people and will be done for other people, because by any means necessary, right? That's a radical Black tradition. Any means necessary, we're going to survive. And so, yes, there are state programs that we rely on, but more than that, to break down these systems especially, we rely on us. And I've seen how tremendously transformative that can be. So mutual aid work is disability justice, right? And it's work that needs to be furthered and is really worthy of investment. You know, and if you don't ask for help, if you don't try, you really never know the kind of help you can get. But bringing that vulnerability to your community, again, community is the perfect place to bring vulnerabilities for survival. You know, you may be surprised. Move this. Okay, in conclusion, community interdependence and mutual aid are strategies for disaster preparedness. The community mutual aid I discuss here is direct action by the people towards liberation, social justice, and community care without the involvement of outside hierarchical figures or roles. This is another quote from Spade. Mutual aid lets people learn and practice the skills and capacities we need to live in the world we are trying to create, a world shaped by practices of collective self-determination. So I think about, for example, right, kids have these kitchens for play, and, they'll pretend to make food, they'll play restaurant with you. And the idea is that part of this play is like reenacting parts of just living and being a person, right? Kids, that's a part of their play. And just thinking about communities as a site where you can practice, right? What you want to do to change the world. I mean, I think it's a really beautiful thing that there's a space where you can make mistakes, where you can grow, where you can be educated and educate, and continue to work towards liberation, right? You're shaping the world, your community is shaping you, and the possibilities are endless, I believe. This mutual aid renders everyone worthy of care that addresses their needs, whereas financial assistance from institutions, on the other hand, only help those who are seen as the best of the marginalized. The key is to emphasize the most marginalized members of our communities, as their access to and affordance of resources is the most limited and impacted by systemic injustice, right? So we're looking at people who are multiply marginalized, right? We're looking at people who have been incarcerated, people who have been homeless, right? People who may have been in the foster system. We're looking at the intersection of these experiences, these marginalized experiences, and understanding our own privileges, and seeing who needs to be centered in the community, again, because this is about survival needs and meeting the needs. I was gonna add, and again, this was kind of mentioned when you talk about the best of the marginalized, right? There are desirability politics at hand when it comes to mutual aid. Geographic location is a major factor when it comes to mutual aid. For example, there may be more mutual aid resources in New York City than the suburbs of upstate New York. There are all these factors that really determine and complicate who gets help and when they get help. And this has to be addressed. if we're going to change the world and we're going to survive, which again, I assert we will. Mutual aid can be adopted by any and all communities, making it a replicable practice, right? This is something everyone can do. Let's remove the stigma that this care work, community work is extraordinary, and let's make it ordinary and everyday, because this work is done every day. And finally, we can ask the question, who is our mutual aid serving and why? This is a way to kind of keep in check that we are centering the most marginalized. And also in your community, you want to make sure that mutual aid is truly addressing the needs of the people, right? You want mutual aid that's addressing a crisis that's at hand, issues in the community as people need it. You want a flexible mutual aid movement that in which people can make open-ended requests. Certain resources are available. This is just an ongoing question. Community building and mutual aid is ongoing work. Here's just a list of resources. I have to figure out, oops. All right. I know there's a way to end this. Sorry, new to the Zoom. I can stop sharing and I can stop recording. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.